communities and housing partners. My name is John Turner, Manager of Community Development Research at the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. Also joining me today from NIFA is Susan Pullis, who is behind the scenes helping to monitor the chat and answer questions. I'd like to make a couple of announcements before we get started with our webinar. Due to the pandemic, NIFA is postponing its 2021 Annual Housing Innovation Marketplace Conference, and that's being postponed until March 28th through the 30th of 2022. We are offering our 2021 Annual LIHTC Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Compliance Training on March 15th through 17th, featuring trainer Gary Kirkman. You can register for this online training by going to our website at nifa.org. So today actually is the third webinar in our Missing Middle series, and our webinar is entitled Developing an Affordable Housing Action Plan. Our panelists today are Derek Miller and Wynn Hjermstad. Derek is the Long Range and Mobility Planning Manager with the City of Omaha Planning Department and has been with the department for the last 14 years. Prior to the City of Omaha, he worked as a city planner with the City of Bellevue, Nebraska, and Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Departments. Derek began his professional planning career at JEO Consulting Group, working throughout the Midwest. Derek received his bachelor's degree in urban studies from UNO, his master's degree in community and regional planning from UNL, and his graduate certificate in public management through UNO's College of Public Affairs and Community Service. Derek is a certified planner and has been a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners since 2003. Wynn is the Community Development Manager for the City of Lincoln. She has been with urban development for 28 years, serving as manager for the last 20 years. As manager of the Livable Neighborhoods Division, she oversees federal CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, Home and Emergency Solutions Grant Programs, ESG, and staff that help low and moderate income people with housing rehabilitation, revitalizing older neighborhoods, and assisting homeless service providers. She also oversees affordable housing efforts of the city and was project manager for the city's Affordable Housing Coordinated Action Plan. Wynn manages several large-scale redevelopment TIF projects, including Antelope Valley Revitalization, Nebraska Innovation Campus, redevelopment of the VA campus, the Telegraph District at 21st and N, and additional projects in older areas of the city. So welcome both Derek and Wynn. Also, before they start, let's just remind everybody that we'd like attendees to save their questions until the end of the presentation. You can simply use the question feature on the right to input your questions, and NIFA staff will hold those until the end of the presentation. If maybe the question's too much to type and you'd like to ask it verbally, you can raise your hand. There's a feature for that, and we will unmute you so you can talk. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Derek. And let me give you your screen. That'd help, wouldn't it? There you go.
How's that look, John?
Looks great.
Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, NIFA, for setting this up. Talking about Affordable Action Plan, City of Omaha and our efforts. But before we get into that, and I'm sure many of you are aware, but housing affordability is becoming more and more of an issue, even in Nebraska. One of the best articles that I've read that explains the issue around housing affordability is by Brookings. They really get into all the different aspects why housing is costing more and it's becoming more of a problem. Couple of slides that I like to show when I talk about housing affordability. One issue is the homes we're building are just so much bigger. And interestingly enough, the homes we build and the space we have per person is bigger as well, as more space per person. So I always find that kind of ironic. So between 1950 and 2017, the size of a house almost tripled in size. Another major issue, and for those that are in the government sector, any type of affordable housing or multifamily housing is just the NIMBY factor. And cities that are experiencing infill development, this is also a major issue, and it causes problems with housing affordability. And it's not a new issue. Been talking about NIMBYism for quite some time. In Omaha specifically, the appreciation of homes has skyrocketed since the Great Recession, late 2010s. And then getting right to it, I think this is top of mind for a lot of people, maybe why you're attending the webinar today, is LB 866 got national news on CityLab, and one of few states that was trying to abolish single-family zoning. That didn't happen, but a compromise resulted from that in 866 when it was approved by the governor last year. Really getting into there's three main parts of the bill of 866, but two parts that I'll talk about today. One was a affordable housing report, very similar to what communities have to provide in their TIF report. So City of Omaha develops a TIF report on an annual basis, talking about our TIF program. This affordable housing report's only due every 2 years, and we're currently working on it right now. And it really gets more to the regulatory side of things. This was the compromise from forcing cities to abolish single-family zoning, but really gets into the residential zoning requirements, an area of the community that is zoned for multifamily and missing middle housing. Talks about the units that we've created over the year, a breakdown of those units, the units that we've annexed over the last 5 years, and the estimate of per unit cost. And the idea around how much of your community is zoned for multifamily isn't a new issue. It's a national. A lot of people are talking about it. Analysis done by the New York Times last June, or 2 years ago in 2019, and I believe that's where some of the ideas for 866 came from. This is a snapshot of Omaha and areas that are only allowed for single-family zoning, and those are the areas in yellowish orange there. And it's, when you put it into a map form like the Times did, really is striking how many of our communities are zoned only for single-family. So again, we're slowly pulling our report together. We're not complete yet, but some of the other requirements the bill talks about is incentives, regulatory incentives, density bonuses within zoning that allows more density. G there talks about ADUs. Some communities in Nebraska allow accessory dwelling units or granny flats or mother-in-law suites and such. Currently Omaha, we do allow them, but it's not by right. You have to go through a process to get that done. Other incentives that provide regulatory relief. The bill also wants us to provide a demographic analysis, trends, housing needs. And then G really gets at the next step, where we're at with our affordable housing action plan. Less requirements in the action plan, more general. It mostly talks about goals of construction of affordable housing units, areas of the community we want zoned for multifamily. On the funding side of things, how we use incentives, how we use federal money, and then any updates to our city's zoning code, ordinance, and regulations to incentivize affordable housing. So this is not as explicit of a requirement of the bill. Probably could be a one-page memo if you wanted to. Like I said, we haven't started the process of our affordable housing action plan. We do have a lot of great information from ongoing work, recent work, and some studies. The first one was AFFH, Actively Affirming Fair Housing. Really, that's pulling from the 68 Fair Housing Act, and was a process that we went through a few years ago to assess past goals, starting to analyze fair housing issues, set priorities, and move forward. Unfortunately, through this process, we went through and did all the hard work, all the public engagement, and the whole thing was scrubbed by the last administration. Possibly could come back, but what came out of that was a whole host of great information, a lot of great public engagement through that process. So there's a lot of data collection that we did that we'll just have to update and we'll use for our action plan in the future. One big thing and I think anyone should do, is just look back and look how we arrived at this point in time with housing affordability and our housing issues. Most communities practiced redlining back in the 30s, and that morphed into other things that really restricted fair housing in many of our communities. But we looked back, did all the research. There's a lot of great research on the history of Omaha housing, and pulled that into that AFFH process. The other thing that we're required to do by the federal government is a 5-year consolidated plan. It's a 5-year strategy and an annual action plan on how we intend to use our federal funds. So we'll also rely on this information moving forward when we start to develop our action plan. Last thing, a local foundation that's really involved in affordable housing in Omaha completed and has provided a comprehensive housing assessment last summer. Really got into defining affordable housing, basically a 2-bedroom unit, safe and decent quality. It's about $930 a month, which equates to about $18 an hour. Basically, you have to make $18 an hour to have be able to afford a housing unit. What it also showed was 25% of the households in our MSA cannot afford this rent, so there's definitely a gap. Other information this report provided was over the next 20 years, we're going to have to spend a little over $17 billion to meet the need, the projected need, the growth of our community, and also a portion of that $17 billion is in rehab, because that's another important aspect that needs to be done, is rehab of housing units. What it showed was about a 13% or $2.3 billion gap over the next 20 years that we're going to have to fill. Wrapping up here, in our housing, affordable housing action plan, things that we're looking at, and again, we're not as far along as Lincoln, which you'll hear about here shortly, but things we're thinking about: we need to increase the number of supportive housing units, accessible units. We have a pretty substantial issue in our elderly population, wanting them, most of them want to stay where they are, and we want to support that, so allow aging in place. Demonstrated by that housing assessment, we're going to have to find new funding mechanisms. As I just mentioned, we need to preserve and rehab the existing affordable housing that we have today. Another major issue that's directly connected with housing is mobility and access to the community. So we have ongoing efforts in Omaha, an effort by the Chamber called Connect Go, to provide more and increase the accessibility to our community, because it's really restricted by our car-centric design of our community. Also, increase infill opportunities. There are a lot of communities, including Omaha. There are tremendous opportunities for infill, so we need to continue to provide everything we can to allow those opportunities to happen. And then finally, another idea that we've been talking about is developing policy associated with this action plan and the codes that will support affordable housing. And this plan, it can't be developed in a vacuum, and we realize that, so we need a fully inclusive process with the public, with our existing housing partners, our partners in the state and federal government roles, philanthropy. We need to roll in market rate developers. I don't think we have enough conversations with them about affordable housing. And then also we need to grow our stock of developers. We need more smaller developers that can do smaller projects. And one thing about this is that, again, being inclusive, we need to demonstrate what the issue is, and because I don't think most people in the community understand the issue around affordable housing and housing affordability. And we still have issues. We have a market rate project that's going through our entitlement process today in a suburban area in Omaha. And anytime we talk apartments near single family residential, people come out in force, and we spent 2 hours planning board last week discussing apartments and the community's desire not to have them located in their neighborhoods. So again, going back to NIMBY, we need to have the YIMBYs stand up. We need advocates in the community to help with this issue. It just can't be government and our partners. We need others in the community to discuss the issue. So again, we're early in the process, and I think a lot of these ideas can be transitioned to other communities in the processes as well. But and that's all I have. I can't remember, John, if we're going to take questions after the second PowerPoint, or if we can take questions now.
I think we'll just move on to Wynn. So let me make her the panelist. Wynn, I'm going to go ahead and turn your camera and mic on. Hopefully that works. Do you see the prompt, Wynn?
Yes.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm doing your presentation. I apologize for that.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Okay, let me pull up your PowerPoint slide. Okay, can you see that?
No.
Let's see here. Bear with us for a moment. Okay, trying to get it to be full screen here. Okay, I think we're getting it. How about now? Can you see that?
No.
No? Okay. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Can hear you, but I can't see the presentation.
Okay, I think we have it. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. I'm going to turn my, Derek, if you want to go ahead and mute yourself.
John, we still don't see the presentation.
Try it again. How about now, Susan?
Still no presentation.
It keeps knocking me off for some reason. Okay, how about now?
No.
Well,
Let
Wynn,
me-
do you want to, maybe I could have you try to share your screen. I'm not for sure why it's not working. It says people can see my screen, but you can't.
Oh, I didn't have it loaded.
Here, let me try. I'm gonna. All right, so hang in there, folks. We'll figure this out. I am going to just kind of start over. Make myself, let's see. All right, Susan, I'm kind of counting on you to give me updates. Right now, it says I'm sharing my screen.
Well, why don't we try and share my screen and see if we can do it that way, because we still can't see yours.
Okay, I'm going to send it to you.
Okay.
Let's see if this works. Yeah, it looks like
there
my
we go.
computer. Got it?
Wonderful.
Okay. Great job, team. I'll let you take
Love
it over.
technology. Are we all set?
We are.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me here today to talk about the process that we used in Lincoln to do our Affordable Housing Action Plan. I'm not going to talk about the content of the plan. I'm going to talk more about the process, how it came about, some of our overarching guiding principles, and of course the process, emphasizing especially the public process and then the approval process. So to set the stage on how this began and why we decided to do it, started in about 2018-ish. There was a lot of good work being done in Lincoln, individual agencies, nonprofits, private sector. It was affordable housing had become a goal recognized as an economic development tool by the Chamber of Commerce. So there were a lot of things happening, but it wasn't coordinated. And the real key here is the need for a coordinated process. There was a lot of pressure, I guess is probably a little strong, but there were people that were really urging the city to take this on, the city of Lincoln, that the city needed to bring people together and to do some sort of coordinated plan. Our concern was that, our being the city, our concern was that if the city said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to take on affordable housing, that people would view it as, okay, the city's going to come in, the city's going to take this on and solve the problem. And we all know that it takes a whole lot more than that. And as Derek mentioned in his presentation, we really recognize the need for that coordination piece to include, oh, can you go to the next slide, John? I realize that we're on the wrong slide here. Oh, no, that's right. But that we really needed to bring people together. There were, as I mentioned, there were a lot of efforts going on. There were grassroots efforts being carried out by Collective Impact Lincoln, NeighborWorks Lincoln, South of Downtown Community Development Organization, who were actually out knocking on doors, talking to people to find out what their concerns are. I mean, literally thousands of doors were knocked on and people were talked to. And the biggest need that they heard over and over again was affordable housing, but not just affordable, but quality, and in particular rental. So that really became one of our principal concerns. So recognizing that there's no silver bullet, and that it was going to take all sectors working together, so not just government, but also including the private sector, businesses, philanthropy, nonprofits, all of us coming together to not only work on a plan together, but then ultimately to come up with some solutions. And again, that coordination was really what was key. So we decided to go forward. Can you go back a slide, John or Susan? Nope, we're going the wrong way. There we go. So once we decided that we were going to go forward and to do a plan, then we debated whether we should do it internally or retain a consultant. Due to limitation on staff time, we opted to go with a consultant, and we also wanted the fresh ideas that a consultant can bring into us. So we did a national RFP. This was back in April of 2019. Got 5 very good responses. It was a tough decision. We had 2 local from Nebraska, 1 from Lincoln, 1 from Omaha, and then 3 from 1 a partnership with Lincoln, and then 2 others from national consultants. We had a selection committee comprised primarily of city staff from urban development, planning, building and safety, and the mayor's office. And then we also included the Lincoln Housing Authority on the selection committee. And ultimately, we ended up selecting RDG Planning and Design from our very own local firm from Omaha. We really thought that they were the best fit for Lincoln, understood what we were trying to accomplish, and also, of course, their expertise. Go to the next slide, please. So the process was guided by a 7-member city staff resource committee comprised of staff from urban development, planning, building and safety, mayor's office. So this was our resource committee that met once a month with representatives of RDG. We had 1 point of contact for the city, and that was me. And then we did elect not to have an advisory committee, which is for Lincoln, that's kind of a different approach because we're always all about having committees. But we knew what we wanted to accomplish. We had heard so much input already, and somewhat because of the time. And we did plan to do a very extensive public involvement process. Next slide, please. So to get to the end product, which of course in a plan is setting goals and identifying strategies, the process included reviewing existing plans, a lot of data and market analysis, again, coordination and public involvement. So the starting point of the plan was to build on existing plans. We had, oh, I think we got off a slide here. Can you go back a slide? No, forward a slide. Okay, well, looks like we missed a slide here. So a starting point was to build on existing plans, and I don't know what happened to our slide here, but I have listed, nope, going the wrong way again. Anyway, we have a lot of plans in Lincoln that were already done that we wanted to build on, that they were really the starting point and a given in the process. So our Lincoln Homeless Coalition had an affordable housing task force, and they had done a report called Essential Housing. So we were building on that. The South of Downtown Community Development Organization, in partnership with the city and the Lincoln Community Foundation, was working on a redevelopment and strategic plan. They had a steering committee and a subcommittee working on affordable housing that produced a report with a lot of really good strategies that applied not only to South of Downtown, but to the entire city. So we were building off of that. Fair housing that Derek mentioned, we had done a lot of work on our work with fair housing in Lincoln, and had identified a lot of strategies there. And then, as Derek also mentioned, our consolidated planning process, our strategic plan required by HUD, and the annual action plan had a lot of strategies, a lot of data already, so we built off of that. And then, of course, our Lincoln Lancaster 2040 comprehensive plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the public involvement that we used. We did a lot of public involvement. We had a project website that was on the city's website that kept people updated. Where we were in the process. We had an online perception survey where we had over 500 responses, did a lot of work to try to get the word out to people, to let folks know that not only were we doing this process, but to get input as we went along. We had a lot of help getting the word out about the survey. Our Chamber of Commerce was very helpful in reaching out to not only their members, but major employers and young professionals. A lot of our nonprofit partners helped to get the word out to all of their constituencies. So that was a key point. I think one of the most influential guiding acts that we did were these 24 listening sessions, and listening sessions essentially are focus groups. And then also we had 3 public meetings as well. But if you go to the next slide, which I don't expect you to read this, but the point was to show that we did these 24 different listening sessions or focus groups over a 2-month period. And just to show the spectrum that we included, again, with that guiding principle of coordination. So we had government, elected and appointed officials, as well as city staff. We had groups with businesses through the chamber, young professionals, of course, all of our nonprofits that are already involved in housing. We had representatives from the housing industry, including realtors, home builders, lenders, land use attorneys, landlord groups, and of course, neighborhood associations and neighborhood representatives and foundations. Then in partnership with Collective Impact Lincoln, we did host 1 public meeting. And all of these, we didn't ask the same question at every one. Each one of them was tailored to ask questions of each of these groups specific to them. So it wasn't just in general overall. So if you go to the next slide, please. So again, we had started this process in 2019, in April 2019 with the RFP. The goal was to be done by the end of the year or in early 2020. The data analysis, the public involvement all led to completion of the plan. We didn't finish quite on schedule. We got done in February of 2020. We were kind of bad clients. We kept adding listening sessions to what we had originally agreed to. RDG was great in being very flexible. They would produce information for us and we would want to tweak it. So we ended up being a couple months behind, but we're very happy with the final project. Since this was a local plan, not guided at that time by any federal regulations or state, we set up our own comment period. So we thought, well, 45 days, we'll do a 45-day comment period. And that was in February, so it was our closing date for comments was going to be April 15th. Well, then March hit and the pandemic hit. And so we thought, you know, I mean, everybody was scrambling back then. It seems like an eternity ago, but a year ago is what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this given the pandemic? So we thought, well, we'll extend the comment period for a month until May 15th, because this will all be over by then, right? So we know how, and here we still are. We had planned to do 3 public meetings, March 18th and 19th, which of course got canceled. We were going to do a planning commission briefing, also got canceled. We did do some meetings prior to COVID to present the plan, to help get more public input on the plan. And then there were a couple of virtual meetings that were done, but you know, remember a year ago, what we're doing today was not nearly as efficient as what it is today back then. So we essentially shut down for a while, but we did end up getting over 58 comments on our website. We got a few letters. Our project website over the 45-day period, we had over 216 views on it. So what did we do with the public comment that we did? Even though we couldn't go out and do as much as we wanted to, we did get a lot of really good comments. If you go to the next slide, please. And again, this next slide is not intended for you to read, but just to be an illustration of what we did. So RDG pulled together all the comments that we got on the plan, and generally there were about 8 common themes. And so what we did was on this last page of the plan was addressed each of those 8 themes, either directly said what we were going to do, or if we incorporated comments into or added things into the plan, then we said where in the plan you could find that. Next slide, please. As far as the approval process, we had decided at the outset, when we were just deciding to do this, that we were going to go through a formal adoption process. Even though this was a local plan, again, not required by the feds or by the state, we wanted it to really have some teeth to it. So we had decided before we even started that we would eventually take this to Planning Commission and City Council, and that it would become adopted and actually part of our comprehensive plan. So again, we were delayed due to COVID. Initially, we had hoped to be done in June or July of 2020. In limbo because of COVID, and then LB 866 came about. And so as we started looking at that, we decided that we were already delayed. We didn't really have a timeline that, you know, a date that we had to meet. So we thought, well, let's take a step back, look at the requirements of LB 866 and include those in our plan and then we would have met the requirements of LB 866. As we looked at it, most of what is required in the plan we had already done. There were a few additional things that we needed to do, setting some goals, talking about location, that sort of thing. So we took the time to do that. So eventually we moved forward. We submitted it to the planning department in October. Had planning commission public hearing and vote in November, and then our city council did approve the plan, and it became part of the comprehensive plan in December, so just a couple of months ago. One of the things that you see at the bottom of that slide, it says affordable versus affordability. One of the things I wanted to point out that came up particularly at the city council level, is the idea of who is this plan for, or what are we trying to accomplish here with this plan? And I forgot to mention at the outset that when we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about housing for people that are at 80% or less of area median income. But we recognize that housing is a system. You know, you can't just look at one piece of it without looking at the whole thing. And that's what our market analysis really did. RDG did an awesome job of looking at what's the whole picture in Lincoln and how is it related. But again, ultimately our goals and our strategies were really aimed at that 80% and less of AMI, and also a heavy focus on rental, because that's where, again, through our public involvement, where we heard there were the biggest concerns. We address home ownership as well for 80% AMI and below, but really focusing on affordability for rental, and in particular, people that are most vulnerable and paying that are cost burdened at that 30% of their income going to housing, or extremely cost burdened going up to 50. So when we got to city council, there were some constituency groups that were saying, wait a minute, if Lincoln is going to make affordable housing an issue, we need to look at affordability. And so that's a broader topic than 80% AMI and less housing for those people in those income categories. So they really wanted us to look, some of the people that testified representing primarily industry groups, that wanted to see this be a broader plan that talked about, you know, some of the things that Derek talked about, the availability of land, what can be done to help reduce costs, and those sorts of things. So ultimately where we ended up is, we said again, really the focus from the outset, our plan for this plan when we started was to really address housing for people at 80% AMI or less, and we were going to stick with that. But the city council did unanimously approve a motion to amend, where on that last page that I showed you, where we looked at all the comments, where we added, yes, it's looking at affordability, and the larger picture of affordable housing is really important, and we agree with that, but not for this plan. So what we agreed to, or what city council wanted to do then, and what we did, was say this will be a comprehensive plan issue. The city is currently in the process of updating our comprehensive plan, and so this idea of affordability for the housing, the whole housing system, will be something that's addressed in our comprehensive plan. So if you'll go to the next slide. I was going to talk about LB 866, but Derek really did a good job of covering that. One of the things I did want to point out, though, and re-emphasize is LB 866 really does three things. So it requires the annual, or the report, the housing plan, and then there's also a funding mechanism, which that's a whole nother webinar. But I really wanted to re-emphasize that the report and the plan are two different requirements, and that report, and again, Derek did a really good job of going through that, which I was just going to mention, is due, everybody is due, that report is due July 1st of this year. And there's a lot in there. So I would really encourage everyone to read the legislation and start now. Don't wait, because there is a lot to do. And then it's required every 2 years after that. The affordable housing plan there's still a couple of years for that. It's not due until 2023 for cities with a population of 50,000 or more, and another year after that for cities and villages with population of less than 50,000. And if you go to the next page, so we can skip over this. This was just what the goals are, what's required for the plan. And again, Derek covered that really well. So the last slide that I have is we have links to our plan if you're interested in looking at our plan. If you can go to the next slide. Susan was going to put in the chat box, or somebody from NIFA was going to put in the chat box links. There are links to our plan as well as an executive summary. Doesn't look like that slide's coming up. So if you go to the City of Lincoln website, lincoln.ne.gov, and then go to urban development on the front page of our website, there are links to both plans. We've been having oh, that's not the right, well, okay. Anyway, you can get there either by these links or by going to our website. Technology issues aside, we've been having them in the City of Lincoln as well with our website. So if you go there, you'll get the full adopted plan. The executive summary isn't quite updated yet, but the content is all the same. But we've been having trouble getting that loaded onto our website. So I would, in conclusion, I would say that affordable housing is really a priority for the city. Our Mayor Gaylor Baird, has identified it as a priority. And I think that's one of the reasons that we were able to successfully get through this project in spite of the pandemic, in spite of the unrest that went on this summer, everything that was happening. Having her support was huge, as well as our City Council and Planning Commission. Affordable housing from the city government side of it is very strong. But also, as I mentioned at the outset, that whole coordination piece, that the recognition that affordable housing is a significant issue in Lincoln across all sectors, whether it's nonprofits who our partners have. This isn't new for us, right? We've known this is an issue, but the recognition of, in particular, the private sector, businesses recognizing it's an economic development issue, and that we really all have to come together to make this successful. So now we're implementing. We've got 3 different projects underway that I won't get into now because I've probably gone on too long as it is, but we're actually starting the implementation and do have, I think, that broad community support. So with that, I will stop and turn it back to John.
Okay, thank you very much, Wynn. And Derek. Okay, great, you're both on. Yes, thank you very much. And again, apologize for the technical glitches, but great presentations. And we do have some questions. So if anyone does have any questions, this is your opportunity to ask them. You can enter them into the question feature, or if you want to ask, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. I'm just going to go ahead and go through what we have so far. Okay, our first question is, whose responsibility should it be to keep up on and advocate for innovations and new thinking when it comes to affordable housing and affordable housing costs? Does all innovation have to start at go and be fought every step of the way by cities and counties against developers and other entrepreneurs?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at that at first. I think, I know I keep beating this over the head about the coordination, but it really needs to be, there's no silver bullet. There's no one answer. And you all know that. But it really takes that coordination and listening. I think certainly everybody brings different perspectives to it, but one of the things that Derek pointed out was, the number of developers that are doing affordable housing. We need to increase that, and we need to be providing incentives for that. And we talk about that in our plan, is how can we incentivize it, giving the, it's just so multifaceted, you know. And Lincoln, something that we face here that I know not all communities do, but our land costs are really high here. And materials and labor, everybody faces that, but our land costs. So how do we deal with that? How can you incentivize developers to want to do affordable housing when right out of the gate the cost of land is so high? So you know, how do you innovate? Should it be government alone? No, it can't be. If government alone just isn't going to do it, it's got to be bringing in different partners and different perspectives. And it's not easy. If it was easy, it would be done, and affordable housing wouldn't be an issue.
I can't really add anything to that. I completely agree with what Wynn said, but I think it's innovation is everyone, and what Wynn said about listening is extremely important, because cities don't have all the solutions. So I think it's a coordinated partnership of a long-term effort. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And you know, I feel that I was actually a participant in Lincoln's process through the Lincoln Homeless Coalition. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Wynn, of how you kind of had to realize that we're talking about a lot of renters. We're talking about renters with low incomes, but we do appreciate, I know the Lincoln Homeless Coalition appreciated the input that we were able to provide, and to make sure that those folks were considered. Okay, I think Derek, someone had asked if the philanthropic housing study is available to the public, the one you referenced in your presentation.
They will be releasing it, I think, either later this month or early next month. So it's something I can, once it's released, I can send to you, send over to NIFA, and then you can distribute that. But I think from what I've seen in the presentations about the study, it was really well done. So I don't even think so.
Okay. Any suggestions for meeting LB 866 requirements when your community is basically built out in terms of both single family and multifamily land? We will hit the 20,000 population threshold for this requirement for these plans and report soon, but are pretty well built out. The only thing I can see is addressing rehab needs of older housing stock.
I think part of the requirements in LB 866 are to look at zoning as well. So I think for jurisdictions in that situation, and Lincoln is too, we're in the same boat. But what we're doing is looking at our zoning ordinances and what is permitted. And so I think what a lot of communities deal with is R1 and R2 zoning that doesn't allow missing middle housing. And so taking a look at that, I think, is something that can be done so that you would permit through infill and rehabs, that you would allow conversion perhaps from a large single family into a duplex, or if you don't currently allow that. So I would go back to taking a look at zoning and what your zoning allows.
And to add to that, if you want to be proactive, ADUs is, if you want to address that issue, it's more gentle density and it's adding to existing neighborhoods. Of course, you will run into that NIMBY factor, but ADUs are a great way to deal with this issue.
Mm-hmm. Accessory
dwelling.
Yeah, sorry.
I like the terms, you know, granny flats, mother-in-law suites. I used to provide scattered site rental assistance throughout a 20 county coverage area. And I always liked those little houses when I could find them if they were for rent to place the people that I was serving. And they were just perfect for the population.
And you know, I think
neighborhood.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, also is education and listening to people and getting people involved. We've had ADUs, accessory dwelling units, have had some pushback here in Lincoln, that people are concerned about the density, especially in our older neighborhoods that are already quite dense. The idea of adding more density is and everything that comes along with that has been somewhat controversial. So I think, it's really starting to balance the affordable housing needs and making that fit with what the current, what our neighborhoods are like currently.
Okay, let's see, moving on. Okay, so this question was really about integration in neighborhoods and, what are efforts to achieve stable, racially integrated communities? If one neighborhood might be one population, how do you kind of work to integrate other populations into that? So it's really an integrated strategy. And so that's really what this is asking. It's referring to your comments, Derek, about the affirmatively furthering fair housing. That's always a mouthful to say. But glad you brought that up. Any other guidance on that to achieve that stability and integration?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, and again, when you start talking in those terms, even though they won't come out and say it as far as the NIMBY factor, to me, it's more of an education side of things. Educate the public and why it's important to be racially diverse in communities. But I don't know if there's any way you can create policy or regulations to make that happen.
Well, I think something that we mentioned in that we include in our plan is the importance of viewing everything that we're doing through that equity lens, and recognizing that the systemic racism, the systemic issues that are out there, and being cognizant of that as we move forward. And of course, being inclusive goes without saying as well. But looking at, as we implement some of the strategies, one of the strategies that Derek had mentioned was rehab, and rental rehab is something that we see is really key. That we don't have a rental rehab program in Lincoln right now, but then how do we get the word out? Who are we serving? Making sure that every strategy that we do implement, that we look at it through that equity lens and be inclusive as we move forward with implementing strategies.
Thank you. Someone asked a question, they aren't as well versed in LB 866, and asked about requirements for rural communities, population less than 5,000. Do you have any input on that? I know Susan did link the bill in the comments, so that person will have a chance to maybe research that, but I know you're both kind of speaking from an urban footprint, but maybe our guidance. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but I know what Wynn was saying earlier and what I showed in my slides is that housing report there's a lot there, and for some smaller communities, say 1,000 or less, or even greater than that, it's going to take a lot of work, unfortunately. And that was one of the things when we met with the senators that were proposing this. We tried to convey to them is that these smaller communities, it's going to be really difficult. I mean, when the bill was originally written, they wanted missing middle written into every residential zoning district, and just doing that was a burden for these communities that don't have staff, or then just have a village clerk or a city clerk. That's a lot. So I don't have great insight for that question, so I do apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't either. I know that the timing for the plan was, there was an over 50,000 and an under 50,000 threshold, but I don't know if there was a minimum. And I thought about that too, that you look at some areas where they don't have full-time staff, where you only have volunteer clerks, and how I think it's going to be challenging for them to get it done. So sorry, can't say more about the requirements there.
That's okay. And that's a lot of times when we do these webinars and we hear these questions and suggestions, that's what kind of fosters developing webinars on future topics. And I know we are going to have one on leveraging funding in rural communities. So we can look at some communities that work together, which kind of leads to this next question, which is where can developers go to learn about available incentives for affordable housing? And so much of it is what you've both articulated is the partnerships that you've developed and through your planning process. Do you have any other guidance to help people research kind of incentives for affordable housing development? I mean, obviously, NIFA's webinars, and I wish we had our conferences. We will again soon, but
I think for Omaha is just I could put anyone in touch with our community development division and the right person to talk to, and I think through those conversations that information can be shared. We have a lot of information on our website, in our community development section of the website under the planning department. But that's one of the issues. I think from my point is that we need to grow our pool of developers and affordable housing developers. And in Omaha, we have a local nonprofit that has a developer academy, because I think when you're on the outside looking in, it's really difficult to disseminate the complex bureaucracy of a lot of cities. So finding, luckily we in Omaha, we have a group that's helping that issue. But I think just finding the right person to talk to, and that's something I could provide.
okay, thank you.
One of the strategies in our plan was to, again, develop more partnerships and particularly look at bringing partners together to share risk, because of the costs of developing new affordable housing are sometimes just the numbers don't work. So we're in the process, we're working with private sector, with all those partners that I've been talking about, to establish an affordable housing consortium in Lincoln that would be a community lending organization, ultimately work to become a community development financial institution, a CDFI. But a big piece of what that group will do is, the acronym is CARE. So it's coordination, advocacy, resources, and education. So right now, I think it's in Lincoln, it's a bit piecemeal to find out what incentives there are. I mean, certainly you can come to urban development and we can tell you what some are, but I mean, honestly, there's not a lot. I don't think Nebraska has as many tools available as some other states do. So, you know, like tax incentives, we can't do property tax abatement, or, you know, which is a really big tool in a lot of states that through our constitution, we through the state constitution, we can't do it. So, you know, we have community development block grant, we have home funds, certainly NIFA, low-income housing tax credits, the state's affordable housing trust fund. Those are all tools that are available, but, you know, no two projects seem to be alike. Tax increment financing, TIF, we've been requiring more affordable housing in residential projects that use TIF in Lincoln, looking at our TIF policy, how we use it. But it's pretty piecemeal, I would say, and again, really a project by project basis for us here. And that's one of the things that we hope the Affordable Housing Consortium will really bring all of that together, along with the advocacy and education, where developers can go.
Hey, John, back to the previous question. I'm sure Wynn would be willing to as well, but we'd be happy to share the report that we put together prior to submitting it to the state, to anyone that wants to see it, just so they can get an idea of what we're putting into it. So I think the power of these webinars and NIFA and other groups is to share and disseminate information so everyone can see what everybody else is doing. And I think the state would probably prefer that the reports are similar by some means. So we'd be willing to share if needed.
Sure,
Okay,
and
great.
we can do that too.
Thank you. Okay, here's a question about inclusionary zoning. Do you believe developers are going to do affordable without mandates like inclusionary housing or requirements at minimum 10% affordable in every project over a certain number of units? So are people going to want to develop unless there's something like inclusionary housing in place?
Do you want me to go first, Eric?
Sure. I'll see what you think.
I want to take that one. We had a lot of conversations about inclusionary zoning in Lincoln, and I think probably most people here are familiar with it, but in case you're not, inclusionary zoning is a zoning requirement that when you do any kind of housing, then you have to do a certain number or percentage of affordable units, and how you need to define what is affordable. Is it 80% AMI? Is it less than that? But any kind of housing, new housing development that you do, you have to do some percentage of affordable housing, either in different cities, different states do it differently. It can be, it has to be, I'm a developer, I'm gonna go build 200 single family units on the edge of the city. 20% of those, I'm making up numbers, but just for an example, 20% of those have to be affordable, and they have to be built within that same subdivision. Some cities do, you can do it offsite. You can, as long as you do affordable housing, you can do it anywhere in the city or in specific areas. Some provide for payment in lieu of. So I'm a developer, I don't want to do affordable housing, but I will pay the city into an affordable housing fund. So there's different ways of setting it up. So we had a lot of talk about that in Lincoln, and that was one of the key comments that we got during our comment period, is that we opted not to recommend inclusionary zoning in Lincoln. The reason at the time we were doing our plan was that I think inclusionary zoning works really well in certain communities that have certain dynamics and characteristics. And we didn't think Lincoln was there yet. But because of the number of comments that we got, we did say, we'll do a more in-depth study. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at it more in depth and see, you know, is this right for Lincoln? Do we need to look at it more? The question, do we think developers will do it if they're not required to? I probably, they need incentives. I think there's got to be incentives to do it. It's hard. It's not, and like I said, the numbers don't pencil out very well without some kind of, at least now, without some subsidy or some incentives to do it. We have incentives in place now in Lincoln that don't get used very much. So, you know, like density bonuses and that sort of thing, but it still comes down to the cost. And so there's got to be more incentives. But I think the approach that we'd like to use here in Lincoln is that it's a combination of incentives. Certainly things that we can control. When we work with a developer on a tax increment financing project, we've been saying we don't have a policy yet that says you have to do a certain number of affordable housing units if it's a TIF project, but we've been doing that. So, but I mean, it's a good question, and it's hard based on you know, each individual community, whether they'll do it or not. That was a long answer. I'm not sure I answered the question.
I couldn't find a better answer than that, but Susan just shared a report from ULI, Urban Land Institute, on inclusionary development. It's pretty well done, so take a look at that. But yeah, it can become a very political, polarizing topic, but I love to discuss inclusionary zoning.
Okay. How do you deal with accessory dwelling units when people want to sell them off separately?
So we went through and added or updated our zoning code to allow people to do it, but they have to come in for a change of zone and a conditional use permit, which, you know, that's what we can do now. Hopefully we can make it by right later on in certain areas, but we have a provision that doesn't allow the property owner to sell them off, and that property owner has to live on site in either the accessory dwelling unit or in the house itself, the main house. But there are some cities that allow you to sell it off, but I think for the public that has concerns over ADUs, that would be a no-go.
Okay. And I believe, Derek, you used the term blockbusting. Someone asked what that is? What is blockbusting?
That was on my PowerPoint, and that was one item I probably should have taken off there because I don't remember at this point. Wynn, do you remember what blockbusting is? It was more real estate realtor type thing, but I can't remember. I'd have to look it up, so I do apologize. Be careful what you put in your PowerPoints.
When I guess the way we've talked about it is when we're looking at doing infill development, one of the issues is being able to assemble enough property if you want to do a larger project. So if one owner goes in and buys up, you're trying to assemble a whole block, let's say, to do a project. And blockbusting would be where a developer goes in or somebody goes in and buys up one or two properties and breaks up the block so that you can assemble the whole thing because there's one or two owners.
Your web connection slowed down a little bit, so we weren't able to hear the last part of what you said. Technology, so you've kind of froze up a little bit there.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting a note here that says my web connection is unstable. So sorry about that.
Okay, well, we could do some research on blockbusting.
If I could
let's
jump in there too.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, this is Rin from the City of Omaha.
Hi,
Historically, with blockbusting too, what real estate agents and developers would do is they would convince white property owners to sell by instilling fear that racial minorities would move into the neighborhood. It was a development tactic where just out of fear, a racist fear, the white property owners would sell their property at low values for the developers to pick up, and then that would allow the developers to redevelop at higher prices and increase their profit margins.
Thank you. Okay. Here's a question. You mentioned door-to-door efforts to gain information from residents. How was that coordinated? Who led those efforts? The City of Lincoln, nonprofits?
Sure. Is that for me?
I
Derek,
think
I don't know
so.
that you talked about that. Okay. It was nonprofits doing it. It wasn't the city. Love that they did it and that we could partner with them and get the information that they learned, because we don't have the staff to go out and do that. But two groups in particular I referenced before, Collective Impact Lincoln, which is an effort. It's three groups working together: Civic Nebraska, Nebraska Appleseed, and the South of Downtown Community Development Organization. And they've come together working with building grassroots neighborhood. I hate the term grassroots, it's so overused, but that really is what it is. And they went out and knocked on doors and talked to people. South of Downtown Community Development Organization is part of Collective Impact, so they did that as well, both as part of members of that affiliation, but then in their own area as well. So it was nonprofits doing it, but fortunately, they were sharing that information with us, what they were hearing from people. It was amazing that they were able to do that. I think one of the things that we all face in probably more in larger cities is having the capacity to reach people. You want that genuine input. We often go to neighborhood associations, but we know that neighborhood associations tend to represent a particular constituency, that not everybody is going to neighborhood associations. So how do you really reach people to hear their concerns and to get their input? And so they're willing to share that information with us.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, let's see. Are either of you familiar with the court ruling on tent cities in Idaho and how it will encourage more action to address increasing affordable housing? That's something I'm not familiar with, but I think I want to look into that.
I've
sorry.
heard of it, but just very anecdotally, I'm not familiar with the outcome of it.
Yeah, I'm not either.
I'd agree. Good to look into.
Okay. I see someone made a comment. The LB 866 bill only requires reports and plans for communities of 20,000 and up. So I think that was in reference to the discussion earlier.
Thanks for that.
What about using SIDs, sanitary improvement districts, correct? For developing land to bring down lot costs, heavily used in Metro Omaha communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a mechanism that has allowed Omaha to grow to a great deal. I know Lincoln doesn't use them, but yeah, it could be researched. The SID mechanism is under attack this year at the unicameral. They're trying to not allow any new SIDs. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, so I think the idea in principle is a good idea. We'd have to take a closer look at that. But still, I think you can spread your costs out over longer periods of time, but at the same time, it's what Wynn's been talking about. The costs are the costs.
Yeah, we don't use them in Lincoln. It comes up fairly often. That was one of the comments that we got from in the public involvement or public input process when we finished our plan. Another thing that we didn't include was recommending SIDs. I think in Lincoln, the concern has been, yes, it can lower costs for the developer, but there's a lot of soft costs that then end up with the homeowner over the term of the assessment to pay it back. And also because it's not contiguous, Lincoln is really supported, and it's been one of our goals is to keep development, the extension of public utilities for the school district, everything is contiguous growth, whereas SIDs can result in that leapfrogging a little bit, impacts our school district as well. So there's a number of reasons why Lincoln hasn't done it, but as I said, it does come up frequently, or I don't know, maybe every year or so. The discussion will come up, and I think, as I mentioned, that we're in the process of updating our comprehensive plan, and I'm sure that will be a topic during the comprehensive plan as well. I mean, there's pros and cons to it, and I think in Lincoln, to date, the cons have resulted in us not doing them.
And for affordable housing, one issue is that SIDs can only be used outside the city's corporate limits, can't be used inside the city's corporate limits. So I think that'd be an issue too, is that you want to provide housing and where it's needed, not necessarily always, it's not always needed on the periphery.
And I think that also gets to that affordable versus affordability. And I think SIDs, the view is that they can help with affordability, but there's no guarantee that SIDs will produce affordable housing. So it's again looking at the broader picture of what are we trying to accomplish here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when you mentioned affordability, and this was something that came up when the Lincoln Homeless Coalition was trying to put a report together, was when you're looking at families that are below 50% AMI or even lower than that, 30%, there really has to be some kind of rent subsidy. I think I even noticed Dan Perolek on one of our other presentations when he showed kind of this missing middle diagram, he kind of referred to that lower income threshold as subsidized. Somebody, this person's left, but they did ask the question about, are Omaha and Lincoln doing anything to increment affordability in terms of increasing income to low-income families? And
well, there you go. isn't that what it all comes down to? I mean, if everybody had an adequate income, then it wouldn't be an issue. So I guess we look at what can we have influence over in our plan, and you know, I wish we could do that, but we don't address it. Now there are some planning efforts in the city that, and that's both capital C and small c city, that do address that look at a more holistic picture. I mentioned south of downtown a few times. The south of downtown redevelopment and strategic plan that we just finished working with both the CDO and the Lincoln Community Foundation does look at what are strategies for increasing incomes for, and a lot of that pertains to job training, education, and much more holistic, even, you know, healthcare. And, you know, you start to look at how all the interrelationships, but in terms of what are we doing in our plan to increase incomes, we're not.
Yeah. Well, kudos to both of you for working so well with your local continuums of care, the metro area continuum of care for the homeless in Omaha and Lincoln Homeless Coalition, and, you know, being at the table. I know the City of Omaha is at the table, City of Lincoln's at the table. So I definitely appreciate that. It looks like someone else was nice in putting in some guidance for the question about the 20,000 or less community. So I like it when the audience is helping each other out. Let's see. Yes, Susan shared that document. And here's another person kind of talking about blockbusting. So yeah, thank you to the audience for participating. Let's look here. I think we're just about, we haven't, a lot of different people are commenting on what the blockbusting definition is. So I was not seeing those when they were coming in, but they were further down. So that's good. And we always do save copies of our questions. Oh, and the person was talking about Idaho. The court essentially told Boise, Idaho, that the tents were their problem because they hadn't addressed affordable housing. So that's a challenge. I know they are dealing with some of that in Minnesota as well. You know, and it's all about creativity. I mean, we had Boise, Idaho on one of our webinars talking about how they built an apartment complex for people that were chronically homeless. They provide 24/7 support services. They recognize the high cost to the cities. So Boise has done some good things, but it sounds like they've got their hands full now. So yeah, I think that pretty much sounds like we just all need to advocate for affordable housing and for increased wages and benefits. And we do have our work cut out for us, but I definitely, we appreciate you both coming today. And do you have any other comments that maybe weren't addressed that you'd like to say before I do my outro?
No, I think so. Thanks for having us.
Yep, thank you. If anybody takes a look at our plan and has any questions, I'm happy to visit about it. Yeah, just shoot me an email.
Okay.
And thanks to NIFA for pulling this together.
You bet. So that completes all the questions from today's presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and a special thank you to our presenters again. I would also like to take this time to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, which was OPPD. This webinar has been approved for 1.5 hours of continuing legal education. If you neglected to enter your license number, you can contact us after the webinar at outreach@nifa.org. Again, just another plug for our virtual 2021 annual low-income housing tax credit compliance training on March 15th and 17th. You can go to our website. And the last is this webinar, along with all of our other webinars, are recorded and available on our website, nifa.org, under Community Development, the Trainings and Webinars tab. Or actually, you can go to YouTube, and we have a channel there at NIFA Housing. So that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you both so much for presenting, and we'll look forward to work with you in the future.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
You bet.